Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are doing the first in my companion build series. This is a series of 4 videos, each covering builds for the various different non-origin companions in the game. This will be Halsin, Minthara, Jaheira, and Minsk in that order. I'm glad I waited to do this series instead of doing it right after the origin build series, because now with the current patch 6, hotfix 20, you can now recruit all of these guys in a single playthrough. That being now Halsin and Minthara can be in your camp in the same run, which is great. That means that now you can have a save file that is complete with every possible party member. And as such, I wanted to continue the origin build series by, doing the rest of the playable characters, including the similar restrictions of at least trying not to repeat the same equipment, although there is one exception later on in the series when we get to it, so that all of these builds can be ran on the same playthrough if you so choose. Now, with Halsin specifically, he's in a bit of a weird space. Obviously, when I do these builds, I try to keep the general identity of the character as it exists in-game. And as such, me and the other members of the community over on our livestream where we actually made these builds together, we kind of immediately came to the conclusion that, well, Halsin is a moon druid. His whole thing is turning into a bear. If we were to change that, then, well, it's not a Halsin build anymore. So yes, this build is going to be predominantly a moon druid, which I've done before. So if you've watched a lot of my videos and you've seen videos where I have moon druids present, then you may be somewhat in the know of what to expect. There's going to be some similar things there, but I feel like with the little bits of advice that we give, some interesting tech that you may not have known about, and the inclusion of some pieces of equipment that some of you may not have thought of for Halsin, I think you're going to quite enjoy this build. If you are more of a beginner to Baldur's Gate 3 and you just kind of wanted to know how to build this character and you're not too familiar with building druids, or specifically moon druids, then this is the video for you, especially if you've not seen my other stuff, because this is basically going to give you the rundown on how to make moon druid work pretty damn effectively. You'll probably see the combat footage on screen now as well, and you can see it's a bit of a weird one. This build does do a lot of damage overall and can attack a lot of times and just be very, very powerful in general, with a lot of versatility and a lot of tankiness as moon druids get. But the Steel Watcher was just like, here is the one status effect that's going to screw you over. Maimed. And we'll get more into that towards the end of the video when I talk about the combat footage in detail. However, you will see that this build can shred pretty hard. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into the build. Of course, we're going to be kicking things off as a druid. Again, this is Halsin's whole stick, and keeping with the origin build series theme, we want to start with their original class. So we're starting with druid here. This is going to give us everything we need: light armor proficiency, quarterstaff proficiency, again referring to the equipment we'll be getting later, as well as a bunch of useful stuff for druids, namely some cantrips and some spells. We get 2 cantrips right at the start, and I normally would say pick up guidance straight away, but we're actually going to be getting it a different way, spoilers, so you can pick up whatever you like here. I'll go with Produce Flame and Thorn Whip, although picking up Shillelagh wouldn't be a bad idea this early on in the game if you wanted to, but we will have opportunities to pick it up later. As for our stats, this is our stat spread. Now, the way I wanted to kind of make Halsin interesting, because obviously the problem with moon druids is that you're just going to be wild-shaped all the time, you don't get to use a lot of the druid stuff. But with Halsin, I decided, hey, let's make him interesting both inside and outside of wild-shape, so we've got a pretty fairly standard stat spread. Really, if you build a wild-shape druid and you don't really care, and you basically just want to be in wild-shape all the time, then you only really need to focus on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, because your, physical stats are determined by your wild shape form, not your base stats. So, you can kind of just build 4 of these. It's actually great for being a face of the party playing a wild shape druid. It's actually quite fun, but I digress. For a build that wants to be both in and out of wild shape, dexterity at 14 just to give us a little bit of armor class. It's not as an important stat because again we are going to be wild shaped quite a lot, but it's nice to have it rounded out. Constitution at 16 just giving us that bit more health while we're outside of wild shape and can help with concentration on spells, so I like having it at this level. Intelligence is at 12 because I don't often use intelligence in my builds, and Halsin is quite a smart cookie. I mean, he does quite a lot of things throughout the story that, well, can only be done by a smart guy, so, There you go. And Wisdom is our main spellcasting stat, so we want it pretty high. I've dumped Strength because we don't really need it. I mean, despite the fact that Halsin is an absolute beefcake of a man, bloody look at this boy. He doesn't need Strength while outside of Wildshape, so we don't grab it here. And Charisma is a little bit on the lower side, because let's be honest, how many of you actually romanced Halsin without the bear scene? Come on, let's be real. You didn't bang him for the fact that he's this absolute giga chat of a druid. You banged him because he turns into a bear. You fucking weirdo. Next up, let's get on to the proficiencies. Obviously, Halsin comes packed in with the Outlander background, giving him proficiency in Athletics and Survival. That Athletics proficiency slightly patching up our crappy Strength, but not by much. And Survival is always nice. Because he's a Wood Elf, he gains Perception for free, which is always nice. And, of course, we're going to be taking Nature and Arcana as his proficiencies. Nature because he's a bloody druid, and Arcana because, again, he's quite smart and very knowledgeable about magic, so it made sense. Next up, at level 2 of Druid, we are going to become a Circle of the Moon Druid as we get our subclass here. This is going to give us a ton of important things. Let's go over them. We now have Combat Wildshape, which means now we can Wildshape as a bonus action instead of the Druid's normal having to do it as an action. And we can transform twice per short rest, which is perfect for us. We also gain the unique ability Lunar Mend, allowing us to expend spell slots to regain hit points while in Wildshape. This allows us to be extremely tanky. Because normally, when you are playing as a Wildshape character, you use the HP stat of that character of that Wildshape, added onto your regular character stats. So you have a massive pool of HP. Lunar Mend is going to allow you to stay Wildshape and be even tankier, but also, you know, you can still keep those spell slots for spellcasting outside of Wildshape as well. So you have a lot of versatility for a build like this. As usual for a level 2 Druid, we're going to get the usual Wildshapes, that being Wolf, Badger, Spider, Wolf... Wait, what's that one? No, that's just regular Wildshape. Whoops. Wolf and Cat. So we get 4, but in addition we get the unique Wildshape Bear, which Halsin is known for. Pretty awesome overall. It's a decent early game form. I mean, if you've used Halsin during the early game quest, you know that this form can do some serious work. So it's nice to have it here, his iconic bear form. Now, we do get some spells as well, and I think we're just going to pick up some utility options that can also work in Wildshape. Speak of Animals is great, just because it allows us to communicate with beasts even when we're not in Wildshape, and, well, I feel like Halsin would absolutely have this. Long Strider gives us a movement speed buff that continues while in Wildshape, so that's perfect. Good Berry, because I want berries. No other reason than that. Don't need another reason. And then finally, it can be whatever you like. I would say Entangle can work kind of well for a build like this. It's very druidy, and I would say Enhanced Sleep for getting around the map can be pretty useful. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to quickly dip into our multi-class options. We take 2 1-level dips here that can help out our Wildshape form, and overall just make Halsin a bit more effective. Anyway, you don't need to take these levels at any particular point. It doesn't really matter where you take them. I'm just showing them off now so I can kind of get the explanation for them out the way before we dive further into the Moon Druid stuff. So, let's start off with our first one, which is a bit simpler to understand. We're going with Fighter. Now, Fighter is going to give us a bunch of things like martial weapon proficiency and all that, which is great. And if you wanted to start as a Fighter instead of a Druid, you would get con save proficiency, which means you can maintain concentration a bit easier. But we're taking it here because, like I said, per the rules of the series, I have to start with their original class, so I'm starting with Druid. This is going to give us a fighting style, and you may be thinking, what fighting style would work for us? We don't use weapons. Well, Defense gives us a +1 bonus to armor class while wearing armor. This build wears light armor, and that defense buff carries over into Wildshape as long as you're wearing armor before you Wildshape. In all, giving us a buff to our AC, which is always good. A +1 for AC is great in any situation, and giving all of our Wildshape forms that, absolutely perfect. Exactly what we're looking for. So, we pick up this 1-level dip of Fighter, because we don't really need levels 11 and 12 of Druid in this build, so we might as well pick up these extra buffs where we can. And next up for our final multi-class dip, we are also going to be taking a quick dip into Cleric. Specifically, War Domain. Because we actually tested this on stream, because I didn't know this. War Domain's War Priest charges, which, for those of you that don't know, allow you to want basically 3 times per long rest at level 1, make an extra attack as a bonus action if you so choose. This works in Wildshape, so if we wanted to go absolutely nuclear on a boss for 3 turns, we'd get an extra attack for those 3 turns. You don't always have to spend it, but it's an extra nice resource to have, as well as getting a few cool things, like some extra cantrips like Guidance, Resistance, and Thaumaturgy, which are great for dialogue. And again, if you're playing this build and you're not playing Halsin and you're playing the face of the party, some very nice cantrips to have there. We, again, get the War Domain, which would allow us to, get a couple of extra spells here, like Divine Favour and Shield of Faith, which can be a nice concentration spell, Shield of Faith, giving us an extra +2 to AC. Not sure if that carries over to Wildshape, but I don't see why it wouldn't. We also get to pick a deity, and unfortunately, Halsin's deity, which is the Oak Father, is not present as a selectable deity for clerics, unfortunately. So in my opinion, the next best option is Mialiki, who is the kind of the nature goddess and the goddess of forests and the creatures that live within them. Basically kind of like a rather remote deity, like the description says, that I think Halsin would take a passing interest in when he's not busy worshipping the Oak Father with all his might. I've also just noticed Shah is here. That's not supposed to happen. One of my mods is doing that. I was like, why is Bahamut down here? Because Shah has entered the chat. Just because Shadow Art gave up on her, so she's looking for the next best person. I'm pretty sure Halsin in it, love. Anyways, we also do get to take some useful cleric spells as well. Sanctuary being one of the better spells in the game, in my opinion, allowing you to not take harm for it if you just need to take a breather or buff yourself up. Bless could be a really great concentration spell to carry over into Wildshape, because Wildshape does maintain concentration, so you could cast Bless and then Wildshape and not lose the benefits, which could be really nice, especially when upcasted to cover the whole team. Can be really good. I would say Bane is useful in a similar regard, basically just doing the opposite for your enemies. And then finally, I'll pick up Create or Destroy Water here, because again, you never know when it could be useful, and you might have someone with lightning magic in your party who will absolutely love you for bringing this. And that is all for our multi-classing. In order to get the best out of Moon Druid, you really want to go to Moon Druid 10, so we're going to do that now. Next up, with level 3 of Moon Druid, we're going to get access to level 2 spells, which means we get a couple that are going to be really nice for our build. Let me just redo my spells here. And so here we can grab a couple of really useful ones. I quite like Moonbeam, because you can cast Moonbeam while you're outside of Wildshape, and it will remain when you Wildshape, and you can still control the position, which is quite good. I quite like this. And also, I would say Spike Growth. We're really good at control with a Druid. You can also pick up Barkskin, which would bump your armor class up to 16 for your Wildshape forms if they don't already have a higher AC than that, so that can also work. But I quite like picking up Spike Growth for battlefield control and Moonbeam for damage. The thing is, though, with Druid is you're going to have a lot of spells that are concentration based, so you kind of have to pick and choose what's going to be best for the moment that you're in. Do you want extra damage? Do you want battlefield control? Do you want to keep an enemy in one place? There's a lot of different things you need to think about when playing a Druid, and again, kind of popping in and out of Wildshape, or, choosing what to cast before you get into Wildshape is really important. So definitely make sure you're making the right decisions in each battle. It adds a lot of depth and complexity to Moon Druids as well, to kind of know what to cast, when to Wildshape, and when. So it is a bit more nuanced and such that I didn't give it credit for before, because before I just saw Wildshape as Wildshape and smack people, which you still do, but now you got to think about it. You don't really, you can just Wildshape to smack people, but I'd like to make it sound more clever than it actually is. Regardless, moving on to level 4, we're going to get 2 new Wildshape forms, that being the Deep Rothe and the Dire Raven. We're also going to get a couple more cantrips, and let's pick up that Shillelagh, as we are using a quarterstaff, and sometimes you just want to bop someone with a stick. I don't ever recommend doing that with this build, but it is now an option for you. As for our first feat, again, we've got this a little bit later, but remember, you don't have to take those multi-classes early if you don't want to. You can take them at any point in the build, it won't matter. But with our first feat, we want to augment our Wildshape form with Tavern Brawler. Now, you can put this into Constitution and still get that little bit of extra HP. Unfortunately, I kind of messed up with the stats here. I've just realised maybe starting off with a 15 in Constitution, putting that extra point somewhere else may work better instead, so you can round that out here. It's entirely up to you. But the starting stats we went with are pretty good. But basically, there's a little bit of extra. We don't really care about the stat increase. Again, that's not really important for this build because most of the time we're going to be using our Wildshape stats. But with Tavern Brawler, this is what we're here for. Whenever we make an unarmed attack, use an improvised weapon or throw something, your strength modifier is added twice to the damage and attack rolls. That unarmed attack is what is important to us because in this game, compared to 5e, which I believe is a different weapon class, Wildshape attacks count as unarmed strikes, unless you're playing specifically as the later Wildshapes that have weapons. Basically, this means that Tavern Brawler will work with them, especially as of the recent patches, where it was officially made possible, whereas before it was kind of a glitch. So yeah, now our Wildshapes that have high strength modifiers, like the bear or the owlbear, are now going to be doing a lot of damage, and I mean a lot. I've used this combo before with my builds like the Wild Titan, which you should absolutely check out, but this combo is really going to make your build feel a lot stronger, and is absolutely recommended to be picked up as early as possible. At Druid level 5, we're going to get access to level 3 spells, but more importantly, we're getting Wild Strike, which means we can now make an additional attack after making an unarmed strike while in Wildshape. Essentially, this is extra attack for Wildshape, which is huge. And we get it at level 5 as well, which is where most martials would normally get theirs, so it's perfect for us. But speaking of level 3 spells, let's talk about it. I'm going to say I want to pick up Plant Growth. Again, it's more great battlefield control that will synergize with some equipment that we'll be using later on. As well as picking up probably another level 2 spell, as I'm not a huge fan of the rest of these for these build. The aforementioned Bark Skin could be really good. Hold Person can be really dangerous if you're up against a humanoid enemy and you're able to freeze them, Wildshape, and then get critical hits on all of your Wildshape attacks, which would, I'm not even kidding, probably decimate an enemy in a turn by the time you're max level with this build. Flaming Sphere is a summon that requires concentration, but again, we maintain that during Wildshape, so that could work. But I think Hold Person is the more powerful option here out of the level 2 options, so I would take this. At Druid level 6, we're going to get some important stuff here, namely 2 of our most powerful Wildshape forms and our subclass feature, Primal Strike. Now, when we're in our beast form, which is Wildshape, our attacks count as magical for overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical damage, which is really great. Monks get a similar thing for their unarmed strikes at level 6, and we get this here. We definitely are going to want this, especially as we get into the late game. We also get the Panther and Owlbear Wildshapes. Now, personally, the Owlbear is my Wildshape choice. It's by far my most favourite. It gets its own version of the Barbarian Rage, which increases its strength by 2, which means it works perfectly with Tavern Brawler, causes enemies to become fearful, which is always nice, and has a massive pool of hit points that are going to be super useful for tanking. It also gains some other unique attacks, like this ability to jump onto creatures, and by how much you fall, they take more damage. This can be used to basically kill bosses in one hit if you know what you're doing. There's a long-known exploit for one of the earlier Act 1 bosses where you can use this. So, in my opinion, Owlbear is probably the most fun transformation in the game, but there are other powerful options. The Panther is also really good if you wanted to take a more stealthy approach, and I think there's something to be said for Wildshape forms that aren't used just for combat. Some of the smaller ones, like the Raven and the Cat, can be really great for infiltration and getting into places without being seen or noticed by guards, because again, a lot of enemies won't actually aggro towards a cat, so it's interesting. I think there's definitely more of a place in this game than you realise for utility Wildshapes, not just the combat ones. But with that, we now have our best Wildshape form, in my opinion, the Owlbear. And it's still a type of bear, so it's kind of Halsin themed, and I'm going to be picking up Flaming Sphere here as our spell, because I've already made a case for it. At Druid level 7, we're going to be able to pick up level 4 spells, and this is where the build starts to get really interesting. We're going to be able to pick up 2 new summoning spells, as well as another useful utility option, which again, these are prepared spells, so you can swap them in and out, but I'll show these ones off here. Freedom of movement is basically going to allow us to snap ourselves or an ally out of stun. Probably an ally, because how would we cast this when we're stunned? Doesn't matter. But now difficult terrain cannot slow this down. We cannot be magically paralyzed or restrained. And if we are restrained by non-magical means, we can spend just a little bit of movement to free ourselves, which we normally wouldn't be able to do. This is a buff that you cast at the start of the day, lasts until your next long rest, and is persistent in Wildshape, allowing us to not have to worry about our own difficult terrain that is created by things like spike growth. I'm still not sure if plant growth counts as difficult terrain, because it doesn't mention difficult terrain, it just mentions quartering movement speed. There may be a rules lawyering thing there going on, but spike growth it will absolutely work for. Next up, though, is the important thing, summon spells. Druids quite uniquely get access to a lot of summon spells, including some exclusive ones, namely Conjure Woodland Being. But here's the thing with the summons, you can summon them before you enter Wildshape, and they just stick around when you're in Wildshape. So you get to create your own little forest army of like different summons and woodland creatures before actually wild shaping, and then, you know, you all just go to town. You're a one-man small army with a ton of tankiness because of your wild shape forms, and as such, grabbing these two spells is really awesome. Conjure Woodland Being is going to allow you to summon a Dryad that can use Nature's Step, so move, which basically allows you to increase, I believe, let me actually read this. What is it? Yeah, basically it allows you and your allies to be unaffected by difficult terrain, cannot be restrained or paralyzed, and gains resistance to poison damage. So a bit similar to Freedom of Movement, but for everyone in an aura around the Dryad. They can cast their own version of Entangle, and they can even summon their own extra companion in a Woodward, which is just another big body that can take a bit of damage and deal a little bit of damage. So for one summon spell, you get 2 summons, which is great. Speaking of getting a 2-for-1 deal, we have Conjure Minor Elemental, which will allow you to conjure 3 different types of elementals. An Azor, which is like a flaming dwarf with a hammer, an Ice or Mud Mephits, of which you'll summon 2 of if you choose to summon those. And Mud Mephits can do bludgeoning damage and slow enemies down with their mud, and Ice Mephits can deal cold damage and freeze people with their ice. So again, a ton of utility here with these summon spells that again will just apply passively while you're wild shaped. So again, you're a little small woodland militia. It's brilliant. At Druid level 8, we get access to another great wild shape form, the Saber-Toothed Tiger, that can get through Armor and regenerate its own hit points, and again comes with a decent pool of its own. As for our prepared spells, nothing really changes here, and I would probably just leave it for the most part. I believe Bark Skin and Stone Skin can also work in Wild Shape if you wanted to try that out as well. Basically giving you a buff to your armor class, or basically Barbarian resistances, which could be really, really nice. So, you know, I forgot to test this out today, but, you know, feel free to do that for me and get back to me. At this level as well, we also get to take another feat. Now, there are more feats that work in Wild Shape. For example, Resilient Constitution would be a very good one, allowing you to gain that con save proficiency that we would have gained for Fighter and increase our Constitution by 1 point. The interesting thing is, though, is that +1 will also carry over into Wild Shape as well, so if you wanted to get a bit of extra strength, dexterity, or constitution for builds that have an odd, for Wild Shape forms that have an odd number, you absolutely could. And that could be really useful in getting a little bit of extra HP out of your wild shape forms. But I'm not going to take this here. I'll just go over the other ones that I know work. I believe Savage Attacker works if you're using the if you use the wild shapes that have weapons, which we'll get into later. I also believe the Lucky Feat now also works, which could be really, really nice for you. And also the Mage Slayer feat works, if I can just find it real quick. Forget how to spell. It was literally right under the one I selected. Jesus. Basically allowing you to give spellcasters a really bad time. So you've got a lot of feat options that work in Wild Shape now, so pick your poison. Do what you enjoy most. But I'm actually going to go for an ability score improvement here, because again, I want Halsin to be useful outside of Wild Shape as well as in it. So I want to increase our Wisdom to give us higher spell save DCs for our Wisdom-based spells. I think this is a pretty smart move overall, but if you care more about the Wild Shape stuff, probably Lucky would be your best bet. We also do get to prepare... nope, we don't. I already did the spells. Whoops. Next up at Druid level 9, we get access to level 5 spells, including yet another summon spell, Conjure Elemental, which is going to allow us to conjure a fire, ice, water, or earth elemental to fight alongside us as well. Again, doesn't require anything from us, it won't disappear if we wild shape, that's great. But also, if we have a level 6 spell slot, which we do thanks to us taking that dip in Cleric, which is another full caster, we can also summon Myrmidons with this, which are basically beefed up elementals that come with weapons, which is where that other stuff comes from. And they just do tons of damage. One can cast haste on itself, others can like slow things down and knock people away. You have to experiment with the Myrmidons to find out what is coolest for you, but they are absolutely brilliant and a really fun time to use if you haven't already. And you can pick up another spell of your choosing, it doesn't really matter. We can technically grab another summon here with Grasping Vine. It basically is just a stationary vine that drags creatures towards itself and does a little bit of damage. Not the greatest summon, but hey, you've got the spell slots, might as well set up an arena trap. And finally, at Druid level 10, we get access to all of the rest of the Moon Druid features. We now gain improved Wild Strike, allowing us to make 2 additional attacks after making an unarmed strike. So now, much like Fighter, we now get 3 attacks in Wildshape. Again, this can work with things like haste. Our War Cleric charges will give us an extra one to use as a bonus action 3 times per long rest. We're going to be attacking a lot with this build. Again, and one of our wild shapes, which I'll get into in a minute, can haste itself. So, it's about to get real. Let's have a look at our other wild shapes now, though. We get the Dilophosaurus wild shape, which is just fun, turning into a dinosaur. Maybe still not the greatest wild shape option, but definitely a fun one. The main one here is the Moon Druid exclusive one, the Myrmidons. That's right, those ultra-powerful elementals I was just talking about, we can now become one. Basically allowing us to transform into air, earth, fire, or water Myrmidons. Fire being the one that can haste itself. And trust me, combining a Myrmidon summon and a Myrmidon wild shape, you get a lot done, let's just say that. Again, you're going to have a ton of summons with this build, which is great, and now you can even transform into one of those summons, which is brilliant. We get access to another cantrip, and there's only one left, so we'll take that. And we get access to another spell at this level, and it really is a pick your favourite situation. None of these really matter. We've got everything we could possibly need. And that is the build. Overall, you get, well, everything that makes Moon Druids great. You're getting, you know, all of the summons, you're getting all of the wild shape forms, you're getting a ton of attacks, a ton of tankiness, the ability to heal yourself. Honestly, I think wild shaped Moon Druids have Barbarian, like, in the, like, kind of fighting for their place as, you know, tanks in the party. Sometimes I even think that really, Druids can do it better, if you play your cards right. So, anyways, let's get into the equipment now, because this, well, it's kind of bog standard for Moon Druids. If you've played a Moon Druid before, again, like I say, if you've watched one of my videos, then you'll know that Moon Druids basically have 4 pieces of equipment that work with their wild shape that you always pretty much want to bring. First up is the Armour of Moonbasking, the most important one. You gain 22 temporary hit points after casting Wild Shape. While those temporary hit points are active, you reduce all incoming damage by 1, so that is just even more tankiness for Wild Shape Druids. But of course, you also have a +2 to your armor class, and you have an advantage on saving throws against spells. This effect also works in Wild Shape. You just become the ultimate tank. There's no other way of shaking it. You just become super strong. This is basically the best armor for Moon Druids out there. 100%. There is no question about it. Now, I haven't really included... Now, unfortunately, this is an Act 3 option, but you can get it straight away if you know where to go. And I haven't really included earlier game options here, because for the Origin Companions, for the most part, you get them quite late into the game. Halsin especially, you have to go through a pretty lengthy questline to actually get him recruitable in Act 2, but a decent Act 2 option could be something like the Sharpened Snare Cuirass, or something like that. Basically just a decent piece of medium armor that will just keep him covered for a while, you know, and the Sharpened Snare Cuirass would work with his Entangle spell as well, so you could definitely go for something like that. But it's not a big deal, honestly. You can kind of just keep him in your party anyway. You don't really need any armor for a Moon Druid, because they just use their wild shape anyway, so, you know, use your wild shape. Don't worry about armor until you get this, basically. Speaking of armor that works with our wild shape is the Shapeshifter Hat, also obtained in Act 3. This just gives us an extra wild shape charge per long rest and a little buff to our nature stat. Basically, this is, again, one of the best pieces of Druid equipment you can get in the game. Specifically, Moon Druid uses this really well, because instead of our lackluster 3 wild shape charges per short rest, 2 wild shape charges per short rest, apologies, we now have an extra one every long rest. So you just have a bit more versatility in being able to dip in and out of wild shape and use the various strategies that can come with that. Next up on our kind of basic Moon Druid kit is the Corvid token. While wearing this amulet, the wearer's jump and flying speed increases by 5 meters, which is great. It just gives us a bit more maneuverability while in Wildshape. And they gain the Featherfall condition. Featherfall's effect will persist while the wearer is polymorphed or Wildshaped. So we have infinite Featherfall, allowing for those owlbear suplexes to not do damage to ourselves as well. And it also gives us the ability to polymorph into a dire raven without using our Wildshape charges, basically meaning that we now have this great utility Wildshape option once per long rest that's not going to take up our charges, which is awesome. We absolutely love this. And finally, as part of the usual Moon Druid kit, we have the Shapeshifter's Boomerang. While shapeshifting or disguising yourself, Wildshape counts for this, we get a plus 1d4 bonus to all checks. This may not come up often, and it's kind of one of those unseen buffs that kind of just works in the background and you don't really notice it most of the time, but a 1d4 bonus to all checks, basically permabless, is really good. Like, really good. Again, it's going to kind of work in the background. You're not going to notice it actively, but it is going to help. Now, here we're going to get into the pieces of equipment that might be a bit different. Let's just get the boring one out of the way. The Explorer's Ring. It gives you a +1 to nature and +1 to survival. I mean, Halsin would have those skills. I was kind of running out of interesting options since the origin characters kind of took all the interesting stuff. So this is just kind of a joke bit. Put whatever you like in here. Maybe even something that just gives you like a resistance to poison. There's a ring for that. That could work. But honestly, this is fine. Just slap whatever you like in this slot. Again, if you're not using some of my other origin builds, give him something from one of those. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Next up is our gloves, and this is an interesting one. These are the Raven gloves. Weirdly enough, you may have noticed this as we were leveling up. Of all the full caster classes to not get Find Familiar, the literal animal companion spell is Druids. Why? That's so weird. Anyways, regardless, this is going to allow us to gain a unique version of Find Familiar called Summon Quoth the Raven. Nice little reference there. Quoth the Raven is basically the Raven Familiar, which can attack enemies for us and blind them. But it comes with an extra ability that I think works for Halsin quite well. When a hostile creature kills the Raven Familiar, they must succeed a dex save or become ensnared in druidic vines. This is literally Halsin's test. When he's fighting an enemy, he summons his Raven Familiar, it helps out a little bit, but then if you do harm unto nature, you suffer nature's wrath and become entangled in druidic vines. It's almost like Halsin kind of setting a trap to test like your character and how you treat nature. I don't know, I just found that really interesting, and again, we now have a familiar, which we wouldn't normally get. And between this and the Corvid token, basically getting us a Raven Familiar and the ability to turn into a Raven, I kind of have Halsin with a Raven theme, like a Corvid theme. Don't know how that kind of happened, it just did. And finally, I was kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel here, okay? The wearer, this is the Boots of Genial Striding, meaning that the wearer's movement speed is unimpeded by difficult terrain. You can get these quite early on, so this means that if you're going to be using Halsin pretty much as soon as you can, you'll be able to do things like Spike Growth and all the other difficult terrain stuff like Entangle and all that, and not have to worry as much about difficult terrain until you get the actual Druid abilities and the armor that circumvents that. But until then, this will do the trick. Again, I'm restricted by my Origin build series, limiting my equipment options, but if you guys are not limited by that, put whatever you like in the slot. But again, there's not really too many boot options here that actually help Wildshape, so it doesn't really matter. This is just an option for when you're not in Wildshape. And finally, onto our weapon. Again, while spellcasting is a big part of this build, we didn't really need a staff that does a lot of spellcasting stuff for us. Really, we wanted something to augment our Wildshape, so I took a page out of the Wild Titan videos comment section, where in that video I was able to use the Dwaegar's enlarge spell to give us bigger Wildshapes because it's fun. And this does the same thing for us. We get Who's a Large Fellow from the Big Boys Chew Toy staff. Essentially, it allows us to cast Enlarge on ourselves once per long rest. And what we would do is we would cast Enlarge and then Wildshape, and all of a sudden, we're pretty damn big. Basically, when we use Enlarge, it's going to give us advantage on ability checks and saving throws using Strength, and weapon attacks deal an additional 1d4 damage. So if we're using a Myrmidon, we get a bit more damage out of it. Overall, It's not a big deal. You can put anything in the slot or nothing at all. Again, if you're mainly Wildshape, it's not going to matter. But if you wanted more of a spellcasting staff, there's plenty of options out there. But I just kind of also thought it was funny to be able to get the enlarged Wildshape combo that I got in the Wild Titan video here without needing to be a Dwagon. And also the fact that Halsin essentially has a dog's chew toy when he turns into animals. It's kind of funny. It's a little bit humorous. Anyways, that is the build, that is the equipment. As you can see, fairly simple. Out of all of the all of the companion builds that you will be seeing in the channel over the next couple of weeks, this is by far the simplest. Not too much here. Basically, again, kind of more of an instructional video on basically just showing how to get the most out of Wildshape and what you can do as a Wildshape Druid. And again, kind of just you're kind of trying to stick to Halsin's character of being, you know, this druidic type and having the kind of Moon Druid's exclusive bear form be kind of his main deal, as well as kind of trying to find some equipment that worked well with that kind of theming. I think the Raven Gloves really did that, and obviously the standard Moon Druid kit is just basically a requirement for Halsin, and I think it works quite nicely. Again, he's this big, strong elf man who's got a heart of gold and wants to do right by you and the rest of the world, and mostly nature, and as such, he is here to help. He's here to Wildshape and take on all of the hits for your team. Nothing is going to stop him from helping you out. And overall, I really like this build. Again, you don't even have to run this on Halsin. Running this on any Wildshape Druid will work really, really nicely. But I really, and again, because I understand Halsin is not the most popular character, which I find funny, because the whole reason he's even a playable companion in the first place is because the fan base wanted him to be during early access, so the devs added him in. And that was kind of a double-edged sword, because while it's nice to give the fans what they want, Halsin kind of doesn't really have a character arc beyond Act 2. So he kind of loses interest, at least for me. But there are people out here that like our big, hulky, you know, druid man, so more power to you. Anyways, the combat footage we'll be playing now, and this one was pretty cut and dry. There was quite a few funny interactions where I transformed into the owlbear and knocked the Steel Watcher away with my claws and did a lot of damage, but the problem is because the Steel Watcher maimed me, I couldn't actually move back in range to hit him, so we kind of just had this stalemate back and forth, which ended up with me dismissing the Wildshape and going into a Myrmidon instead, because I kind of wanted to go in and out of Wildshape, swatch the forms around, and even do some stuff outside of Wildshape just to show you what this build is capable of, and we got to do just that. We used the Fire Myrmidon Wildshape yet. Next, mixed it with haste, and we're able to show off a full combo of attacks using, you know, weapon strikes and the War Priest charge, which absolutely worked for us. And then also towards the end, we were able to cast like Moonbeam and get Quoth the Raven out, and was able to do some fun stuff there. Overall, again, well, the Steel Watchers are a bit weird to test on. They kind of have some stuff that makes them a bit awkward to fight and kind of makes builds look worse than they actually are. But again, it's a pretty strong enemy to basically just kind of show that the build has survivability or damage output and stuff like that. And overall, this build will absolutely do the job. I find you'll find this build does really well in boss battles specifically, where your goal is to take out one guy with a lot of HP, while maybe your team deals with some of the add-ons. This build could just go full Wildshape Druid, go absolutely crazy, and again with the Owlbear, Rage out, hit for 4 attacks in a turn, and just with Tavern Brawler, absolutely decimate them. Like I say, I personally think the Owlbear is the strongest Wildshape to use with this strategy, but the others definitely have some merit, so you can kind of play around with each one to your preference. But you get hasted, like you have a sorcerer that casts haste on this build, and it's game over. Like, genuinely, Wildshape Druids, or some of the Moon Druids specifically, are some of the most powerful builds in the game, if you know what you're doing. So, yeah. As for end of video stuff, a bit of a weird week. Obviously coming back from my hiatus, did the first D&D build, and then you got that extra video yesterday, which, if you know why, you know why. And now we're moving on to the Origin build series. So this is how things are going to kind of work out from here. Mondays are going to be just kind of a whatever builds, build requests, my own personal stuff, whatever. Wednesdays, until we are finished, we're going to be doing the companion builds. So next Wednesday, you'll get Minthara, then Jaheira, then Minsk, and so on. So that's about 4 weeks worth of content. And then Fridays, we're going to be continuing the deity build series with Ilmata this weekend. So look forward to that. Yeah, and we'll be continuing our weekend live streams, usually going to be on Sundays if I can help it, but it may switch to Saturday depending on scheduling conflicts, or it may just not happen at all. yeah, I mean, so if you want to be a part of the future of these kind of series, like I said, these companion builds were built on stream with help of the community, and as well as the deity builds are done in the same way, in which we vote on which deity to do, and then we build them with the community's input. So it's not just me making these builds, it's all of you guys. So if you want to get in on it, try and join in for our streams. Keep an eye on the channel's community tab for stream announcements, but it's usually Sunday at 2 PM UK time. That's kind of the standard time I aim for. So yeah, I've rambled on more for long enough, so thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.